Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'm going to discuss what could be seen a country mile away. Brexit has meant that in addition to the trade barriers inherent within Boris Johnson's extreme Tory Brexit, we now have the added problem that even if things were smoothed over a little, we simply don't have the lorry drivers now to actually carry out our continental trade. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So a good old-fashioned Brexit video, the first time possibly in a few days. Don't worry, not finished with the election fallout thoughts, but while the political circuit is going on, Brexit is still going on as well and still devastating the UK. In fact, you could argue that when the politicians are focusing on, internal party affairs, whether their own or another parties, Brexit arguably gets worse. So the issue with lorry drivers and Brexit was fairly straightforward, really. As part of the single market, we had lorries carrying goods between Britain and other parts of the UK and the EU. Some of these lorry drivers were British, most were not. So then you could imagine how Brexit would affect this. Because we moved out of the single market and customs union, we have trade barriers. That means checks, trickier paperwork. That in turn means extra work and delays. And you could imagine that many EU-based drivers would probably not really want to do the run to Britain for fear of being stuck in queues, the ones that worked for EU-based companies. After all, they know the score, unlike British-based express readers. For example, Turkey is not in the single market, but it is in a customs union with the EU. There are serious delays for lorry drivers passing between Turkey and the EU. Switzerland is in the single market, but not a customs union. So there are checks at the Swiss-EU borders as well. Britain is not in the single market or a customs union. So forget any notion of delays at the Brexit borders being all right now, having moved on from teething problems. They are not all right. They are never going to be all right. It just hasn't exploded yet because the pandemic has suppressed trade and few media outlets are reporting on Brexit properly. And even when they do, they blame the EU for it. But as the pandemic eases, and I do not know exactly when that will be, but hopefully we are past the worst of it. But as it eases, demand will increase. But by how much will trade increase? To what extent will we be able to meet that increasing demand? Because we can't actually match it like we did before. Because even if there were no other problems, those delays means limit on the level of trade possible. If you limit the number of lorries that can physically get across that barrier, then you limit your trade. And that's without lorry driver shortage on top. And of course, we'd have lorry driver shortages. Of course we would, because EU-based lorry drivers wouldn't fancy getting stuck in queues between the EU and non-EU countries. Although some will have to do that still. But it's even worse than that. The driver shortage is no longer just an inevitable consequence of Brexit for the future. It's here now, and it's been reported now. Only there are other things in the mix as well. So reading in the Financial Times about the triple whammy, they'd interviewed a number of people who direct haulage firms. A recruitment freeze from the EU because, the new immigration policies now. So we can't actually recruit EU drivers. So we're no longer even trying to recruit EU lorry drivers now. So that means we need way more British lorry drivers. Now, it's possible you could attract more than has been the case in the past to become drivers because the government is driving unemployment up. High unemployment, always a boon for recruiters. But then you need these people to learn to drive a lorry and get their test done. It's not an easy process. It's a skilled job. But driving tests have been tricky during the pandemic. And there have also been changes to taxation, which has made even retaining already licensed lorry drivers difficult if they're from the EU. To put the testing issue into perspective, the pandemic has caused 28,000 HGV tests to be cancelled. Now, that doesn't mean to say that had they not been cancelled, we'd have an extra 28,000 British lorry drivers right now, because some of those tests would presumably have been failed. Some people would have had tests cancelled multiple times. But it would suggest that this has still caused many thousands of lorry drivers who could otherwise have been available to not be available. And it's been said often enough, the pandemic is papering over the cracks of Brexit. You know, suppressed trade has helped the con men in government in two ways. Firstly, it has allowed them to excuse the downturn in trade. The pandemic is causing all of this. You know, now figures are making it easier to separate out Brexit and COVID impacts to expose the lie in this, which I shall hopefully be covering later this week. But that argument is still working on some level on the public at the moment. Secondly, it's reducing the impact of the trade barriers because although not all of the suppressed trade is down to COVID, quite a bit of it absolutely is. And the pandemic is still suppressing trade. But some trade is trying to pick up and is failing. The managing director of one lorry firm said that within 3 months goods won't be delivered. He said that there were already examples of this now. Now that's pretty big. Yes, we're easing our lockdown restrictions in the UK right now, but there are still measures in place. Major European countries are still struggling as well, notably France, with whom a lot of that trade is going to pass through. We are a long way from the pandemic not being a factor in trade, and yet we are already in a position where people can't always find transport for their goods. What on earth is it going to be like this summer when restrictions are at a lower level? What about after the pandemic when restrictions are eased altogether? You know, you can see why people say that the government are crapping themselves about what they're going to do when the pandemic is over. You know, you're listening to this, Labour. Stop fighting amongst yourselves because the Tories are headed for very choppy waters once COVID is under control. But then you think, so okay, we don't have enough drivers. What does that cause? What knock-on effect is there? Well, it means that the too few drivers you do have can demand better wages, doesn't it? Yes, recruiters like high unemployment rates because it makes it easier to recruit. But if you need skilled workers and there are too few people with those skills, then you have to pay more for their services. And sure enough, there was another lorry firm quoted as saying that their wages had to increase by between 10 and 30%. And we know what that means, higher transport costs. So the businesses that are already having to face higher transport costs, even higher because the lorry drivers need to be paid more now. Supply and demand has been thrown completely out of kilter. And this is, all there to expose the government over if someone had a mind to. The government are pushing the narrative that the pandemic is suppressing trade. Once we come out of the other side, trade will increase because actually Brexit's not that big of a deal for trade. We're sorting it out and we're making things better all the time. This is absolutely not going to be the case. Even if the government somehow manages to improve the systems for customs checks, those checks still need to take place. And that still means delays. But beyond that, if we do not have the freight capacity to even meet the COVID suppressed demand right now in May, we're going to be on our arse come July and August, and when we're going to be crawling on glass during high demand times in 2022, when we should be even further past the worst of the pandemic. Well, you would hope so anyway, or that at least it will be much more manageable. You know, there is no hiding from the consequences of Brexit forever. As the saying goes, you can run, but you'll die tired. We already have small business owners that have had to stop trade with the EU because it's become too expensive. But we also had some business owners saying they need to temporarily halt it while they get themselves up to code. Well, what happens when they then tried to trade? They've got themselves sorted, right, we're ready to trade with the EU now. What do you mean there's no lorries? And what happens when other operators who are managing now can't step up their trade because the transport capacity just isn't there? You know, if right now we have a situation where there's people who cannot access freight right now, what's it going to be like when more are trying to do so? You know, you think they're going to stay quiet while their business is losing a fortune in lost trade? And what will that do to the trade figures over the next few years as well? There's no way the government can ride this one out. It affects everyone. Of course, one solution would be to water down their immigration rules. After all, it's all right having these tough immigration rules, but you just put exceptions in. There already are exceptions in, aren't there? There's the shortage occupation list. Oh, well, we'll just say that's a shortage occupation. Of course it's a shortage occupation. If you need to attract people from overseas, by definition, you have a shortage. Pointless immigration bill. But currently, lorry drivers are not classed as a high-skilled job, which is what's stopping firms employing more qualified drivers from the EU. Now, perhaps the government think that they can get more British drivers trained up. Of course, I could also see problems with flooding the industry with a load of newly qualified drivers all at once, even if this were possible. But it's not possible. You can only manage so much. But like I say, we had a lorry firm saying that there was going to be a meltdown in 3 months' time. This isn't a warning about a situation that's going to get bad if something isn't done in the next year or two. This is something that is bad right now and is going to get much worse in summer. And it will be catastrophic in a year or so, and so on. And the fact that the government have allowed the situation to exist right now means that they could easily be intending to do nothing for the future as well. Indeed, the industry has been reported to have lobbied the government to add HGV drivers to the shortage occupations list. This should be a no-brainer, given that it is clearly a shortage occupation and requires skills. But the government have refused. They've told businesses to adjust. Oh, yeah, right, okay. Just adjust to trade without any transport to send your goods to your customers. Nice one. Oh, and although there's plenty in this topic to keep going, I'm just going to throw one more thing out there. This is apparently an ageing profession. Nearly a third of our drivers are over the age of 55. So that's quite a lot of drivers getting close to retirement. You know, just in case everything else wasn't working against the logistics industry hard enough. And the thing is, without that freight capacity, the arse drops out of our trading goods completely. You know, the government say businesses need to adjust. How do you adjust for not being able to get your goods to your customer? Logistics is the backbone of the whole thing. And the government are doing next to nothing except telling people to adjust and saying, oh, we're going to try and get some more examiners to test people. What's that going to do? But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you do, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.